Back in winter, I made a video of every MLB team's biggest choke job, but now I'm going to be more positive and delight every fan base by talking about their most iconic wins. Again, this is my opinion, while some of these are no-brainers. Also, I may have talked about some of these in the aforementioned chokes video to either piss you off or myself off again, but one team's choke is another team's glory, I suppose. So here's every MLB team's most iconic win. The A's, the 1989 World Series. Make all the roid jokes you want, but the late 80s to early 90s Oakland A's were incredible. Though they only managed one championship with those teams, the chip they won was in one of the most famous World Series of all time in the 1989 Fall Classic between them and Bay Bridge rival San Francisco Giants. Led by their elite pitching and steadily balanced offense, the A's swept the Giants, and none of those games were really close. But what this series is best known for is the Loma Prieta earthquake that struck on October 17th, a half hour before Game 3 was scheduled to start. Thousands of people were in the stadium when the earthquake hit, and it was broadcast live on ABC. With all the damage and casualties, the series was delayed for 10 days before resuming on October 27th at Candlestick Park, hence why this is known as the Earthquake Series. Dave Stewart won World Series MVP with his complete game shutout of the Giants in Game 1, plus his dominant ALCS were deciding factors. The A's made it back the next year where they were upset by the Reds, while the Giants wouldn't make it back for another 13 years, and wouldn't win it for another 21 years. Arizona Diamondbacks, the 2001 World Series. No-brainer here, as the United States was recovering from the effects of the 9/11 attacks. This can be seen as one of the most emotional World Series ever. The underdog Diamondbacks, who were just in their fourth season in franchise history, went up against the dynasty and three-time defending champion New York Yankees for the 2001 title. Arizona showed they were not denied, as the additions of Miguel Bautista, Mark Grace, and Reggie Sanders boosted an already talented squad, but they had a relatively old roster. But the vets showed they can still rake, as Arizona took the first two games of the series in Phoenix, but the Yankees won the next three as the series shifted back to the Bronx, including Derek Jeter's walk-off homer in Game 4 to earn him the Mr. November nickname. Fans were chanting USA all throughout the games in New York as well. But the Snakes just wouldn't die, as they destroyed the Yankees 15-2 in Game 6 to set up a memorable Game 7. You probably know the story by now, as the Yankees had a 2-1 lead into the ninth inning, and manager Joe Torre decided to keep all-time great closer Mariano Rivera on the mound, who had struck out the side the inning before. Rivera was the most dominant closer at the time and possibly the most dominant in MLB history, but when he blew a save, it was extremely rare. After a single and a bad throw on a bunt attempt, Tony Womack ripped a double right to tie it at 2, and then Luis Gonzalez's blooper over the head of Jeter, who was drawn in, that plated Jay Bell for the game winner and the series clincher. Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling shared World Series MVP, and the Diamondbacks became the youngest franchise to win the World Series. The Yankees continued to dominate and won the World Series 8 years later, but many Yankee fans see this as the start of underachieving in the playoffs. Boy, Yankee fans sure have had it rough, have they? Atlanta Braves, 1995 World Series. As a Pirates fan, I'm not snubbing 1992, but I'm just avoiding serving a life sentence with no parole. Instead, I went with the Braves winning it in 1995 over a dominant Cleveland Indians team. Imagine that today, a World Series between the Braves and the Indians. Cancel culture would lose their shit. Anyway, we all know that the 90s Braves should have been a dynasty, with the trio of Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz, and their roster with Hall of Famers at every position, but the only series they won with those teams came in the shortened 1995 season. Cleveland was known for their high-powered offense, but you know what they say, pitching wins championships. In their 4 wins in 6 games, Atlanta held the prolific Cleveland offense to under 4 runs every time, as the offense did just enough to ensure a win, and it showed with Glavine winning the series MVP. His masterful performance in Game 6 in the 1-0 Braves win, where he went 8 innings, shut out the Tribe, and only allowed 1 hit, clinched the city of Atlanta their first championship, the franchise's first title since 1957 when they were based in Milwaukee, and the Braves continued to dominate the 90s but kept falling short in the World Series. Baltimore Orioles, the 1970 World Series. I was torn between this and 1983 for the O's, but I went with 1970 because Baltimore was overwhelmingly better than Philly in that series. In 1970, Baltimore had been upset in the World Series the year before to the Miracle Mets and made it back the next year, and basically didn't miss a beat from the year before. They went 108-54, won their final 11 regular season games, and swept Minnesota in the ALCS to meet up with the 102-60 Cincinnati Reds. This series win also looks more impressive nowadays considering how loaded the Reds were. That's another element for my decision, just how dominant this squad was throughout most of the 60s and 70s. This was a highly anticipated series featuring the beginning of the Big Red Machine Reds offense and the Orioles' unstoppable pitching with 3 20-game winners in Mike Culver, Dave McNally, and Jim Palmer. They were all well rested going into the series, and with the balanced offensive attack the Birds had, they handled the Reds relatively easily in 5 games. This series is most known for Game 3 when Baltimore third baseman Brooks Robinson made a fantastic play at third base for an out, and that was just another highlight to his reel and element to him winning the series MVP. The Orioles made it back in 1971 and 79 but lost close series to the Pirates both times, while the Reds were a borderline dynasty in the 70s with back-to-back titles in 1975 and 76. 3 titles from 1966 to 83 is nothing to sneeze at, but kind of like the 90s Braves, it's kind of surprising these Orioles didn't win more titles with how dominant they were. Boston Red Sox, the 2004 ALCS and World Series. With all due respect to the Red Sox winning the title at Fenway Park in 2013 over the Cardinals, the choice is clear on which World Series victory over the Hackers is more iconic. Remember when everyone used to feel sorry for the Red Sox? Seems like an eternity ago, doesn't it? But what was an eternity was Boston's last World Series title going into the 2004 playoffs. They hadn't won the World Series since 1918, and the Babe Ruth trade to the Yankees was still haunting them. Fortunately, Boston finished 98-64 in 2004 and made the playoffs for the second year in a row. Also for the second year in a row, they faced their hated and legendary arch rivals, the Yankees, in the ALCS. New York won the aforementioned ALCS in a thrilling 7-game series, and, well, we all know what happened here. The Yankees jumped out to a 3-0 lead in the series and looked to complete the sweep in Boston. Then Big Papi walked off the Yankees in Games 4 and 5, and the series shifted back to the Bronx. Boston won Game 6 4-2 and blew out the Yankees 10-3 in Game 7 to complete one of the greatest comebacks in sports history for their first World Series appearance since 1986. The arrogant Cardinals, who brushed aside the comeback, stood no chance at all as the Red Sox never trailed at any point in the series and swept St. Louis for their first title in 86 years, and Manny Ramirez won the series MVP. I may not be a Red Sox fan, but they'll always have my respect for their comeback in the 04 ALCS and for making the Cardinals eat shit twice in the World Series in my lifetime. Chicago Cubs, 2016 World Series. Another pretty obvious choice here, as much like the Red Sox, the Cubs were formerly known as the Lovable Losers. Before 2016, the Cubs hadn't won a World Series since 1908, but in 2015 they built up a solid squad that took them to the NLCS. In the 2016 offseason, the Cubs got even better with adding Ben Zobrist, Jason Hayward, and Dexter Fowler. With a loaded rotation and aggressive offense with an even mix of the right fruits of the farm and veterans, The Cubs dominated all season, going 103-58, and Chris Bryant won NL MVP. In the playoffs, the Cubs took out the Giants in 4 games in the NLDS and crushed the Dodgers in the NLCS, with all 4 wins being by 4 or more runs. It set up a World Series with the Cleveland Indians, who had the second longest title drought, still not having won it since 1948. You know the story by now. Cleveland had a 3-1 lead through 4 games, and it looked as if the Cubs' drought would live on, while Cleveland would be having a second championship parade in 4 months. In hindsight, Game 5 would have been the hardest game for Cleveland to win, as it was in Wrigley and looking to finish off the series. The Cubs held them off 3-2 in Game 5, and the series went back to Cleveland. Chicago beat up on Cleveland 9-3 in Game 6 to even the series, and Game 7 was arguably the most memorable Game 7 in World Series history. After Aroldis Chapman seemingly choked the lead in the bottom of the 8th, the game stayed tied at 6-6 and required extra innings, where a 17-minute rain delay gave the Cubs a chance to rally the team together. Sure enough, the Cubs got a base hit, advanced on a fly ball, and Zobrist drove in the go-ahead RBI double that proved to be the game winner. When it was all said and done, the Cubs won their first World Series in 108 years, Zobrist won MVP, and the Billy Goat curse was broken. But of course, the Cubs haven't won one again, and this team is now basically just the MLB version of the '85 Bears or the '08 Celtics. Chicago White Sox 2005 World Series. Yes, believe it or not, there was a time when the White Sox were amazing. Easily the most forgotten broken World Series drought in MLB history, as the other Chicago team went from 1917 to 2004 without winning a World Series. In the early 2000s, the White Sox built up a solid core featuring Paul Konerko, the Big Hurt, Scott Podsednik, Mark Buehrle, Jose Contreras, John Garland, and hard-throwing closer Bobby Jenks. The White Sox went a dominant 99-63 and had one of the most underrated postseason runs in MLB history, as they lost only 1 game. They swept the defending champion Red Sox in the ALDS, took care of the Anaheim Angels in the ALCS in 5 games, and swept the Astros in the World Series. Chicago only trailed twice the entire series, and both occurrences came in Game 2, where they were down 1-0 and 4-2. Then a 4-run bottom of the 7th game Chicago a 6-4 lead, but Houston tied it in the top of the 9th, but this is where the White Sox won the series. Brad Lidge took the mound for the bottom of the 9th and gave up the walk-off homer to Scott Podsednik. Chicago then shut out Houston in Games 3 and 4 in Houston, and the White Sox were World Series champs. Not only was it the second year in a row where a team called the Sox won a World Series, but it was also the first time in sports history where teams who had droughts of 50 or more years won the World Series in back-to-back years. Now the White Sox only break records on how many games they can lose in a row in a season. Cincinnati Reds 1990 World Series. As I said earlier in the video, the Reds were dominant in the 70s with the Big Red Machine, but I give the nod to the 1990 team because of who they beat in the World Series that season. The Nasty Natty Boys were a nice underdog team in 1990 with a 91-71 record that was good enough for the NL West, with a team of Mariano Duncan, Chris Sabo, Billy Hatcher, Paul O'Neill, and Barry Larkin. The bullpen was their real strength, as 3 primary guys in Norm Charlton, Randy Myers, and Rob Dibble suffocated opponents all season. They once again took out the Pirates in the NLCS to face the absolutely loaded defending champion Oakland A's in the World Series. Oakland was heavily favored to win this series, and after the Reds beat them in Game 1, Game 2 to me is where the Reds won the series. After trailing 4-2, Cincinnati eventually tied it at 4 to force extra innings, and in the bottom of the 10th, the Reds got an infield single and single off of legendary closer Dennis Eckersley to put runners on first and second. Then Joe Oliver walked off the A's on a hard bouncer past third base, while Tom Browning's son was born at almost the exact moment the Reds won the game. Cincinnati completed the sweep in Oakland, outscoring them 10-4 combined to complete one of the biggest upsets in World Series history. Man, I still can't believe the Pirates, Marlins, Rockies, and White Sox have more recent playoff advancements than the Reds. Cleveland Indians, their 2001 win versus the Mariners. Not a playoff game, and it may not have been the 04 ALCS, but in terms of a deficit in a single game standpoint, this is one of the greatest comebacks in MLB history. The 90s Indians were also a team that should have won at least one or two World Series, and they kept failing, and going into the early 2000s, they fell from dominant to just pretty good, but they were still a formidable opponent. In 2001, Cleveland won the AL Central again and lost a few contributors from those 90s teams, but they still had Roberto Alomar, Omar Vizquel, Kenny Lofton, rookie CC Sabathia, and Jim Thome en route to a 91-71 record. In early August, the Tribe hosted the legendary Mariners, who were 79-30 going into the series and won the first two games of the four-game set. On August 5th, Seattle looked well on their way to sweeping the series, as after the third inning, they had a seemingly insurmountable 12-0 lead and pushed it to 14-2 after the fifth. With that lead still fully intact entering the bottom of the seventh, Cleveland began its resurgence by scoring 12 runs after the seventh inning, including 5 in the bottom of the ninth with 2 outs to tie the game. After Vizquel cleared the bases with a 3-run triple to force extras, it just went to show you that the underdogs are never to be underestimated. 2 frames later, the Indians' mission was complete, winning the game on a Holbert Cabrera broken bat single to score Kenny Lofton in the bottom of the 11th. Lofton leaped into the arms of Eddie Taubensee at the plate and was flung over his shoulder in celebration as Cabrera and Vizquel hugged at second base. The 12-run deficit is tied for the largest overcame deficit in MLB history. Seattle would get the last laugh, however, as the two met in the ALDS, where they won in a very close 5-game series, where Cleveland pushed the 116-win team to their limit before falling short. I mean, of course, had Cleveland not shit the bed in 1997 or 2016 to become the new Cubs, that'd easily be their most iconic win. But a 12-run comeback? Not too shabby either. Colorado Rockies, the 2018 NL wildcard game. It was either this or the run to end 2007 for the Rockies, but I chose this one because this was a long-lasting endurance test that lasted 13 innings and 4 hours and 55 minutes, making this the longest winner-go-home game in MLB history. The upstart 91-72 Rockies, who had just lost out on winning their first division title in franchise history, went to Wrigley to take on the 95-68 Cubs, who were coming off choking the NL Central crown in September. What else is new? They lost game 163 to the Brewers at home for said title, and many saw the Cubs winning this one to get back at them in the division series. But Colorado had other ideas. After Nolan Arenado drove in the first run for the Rockies on a sac fly when the Rockies jumped on John Lester early on, it stayed 1-0 with both Lester and Kyle Freeland pitching gems for a good old pitcher's duel. Chicago tied it in the bottom of the 8th on a Javi Baez double and onto extras where both bullpens shined. So really, this is a testament to how great the Rockies' pitching was back then. But in the top of the 13th, Colorado rallied off of Kyle Hendricks with a Trevor Story and Gerardo Parra single. It set up the stage for little-known Tony Walters, who drove in the go-ahead RBI on a single to center to score a Story. Scott Oberg set the Cubs down in order in the bottom of the 13th. The Rockies moved on, where the lack of offense proved to be problematic in the NLDS against the Brewers, and now it seems like a tradition for the Cubs to choke in September. Detroit Tigers, the 1984 World Series. One of the most underrated World Series champions were the 1984 Tigers. They went 104-58, were 35-5 in their first 40 games of the season, and the only day they were not in first place in the AL East was before their first game of the season began. That's right, the Tigers led the division the entire season. These Tigers were great! with the likes of catcher Lance Parrish clubbing 33 homers, Lou Whitaker and Alan Trammell forming a dynamic duo at shortstop, and Chet Lemon's stellar play in center field. The rotation was head and shoulders dominant with Jack Morris, Dan Petrie, and Milt Wilcox. All had ERAs under 4 and all had over 100 strikeouts. Oh, and Cy Young winner and MVP closer Willie Hernandez had 32 saves with a 1.92 ERA. So it was no surprise the Tigers rolled over the Kansas City Royals in the ALCS and went up against a very good but beatable Padres team in the World Series. San Diego gave them a fight in the first 2 games in San Diego, but once the series shifted to Detroit, the Tigers dominated. They won all 3 games and the pitching shut down the Padres. Trammell won Series MVP, going 9 for 20 with a .450 batting average and hit a pair of 2-run blasts, both of which accounted for Detroit's runs in the Game 4 win. These Tigers were amazing, but I still can't believe the Tigers spent $500 million in the early to mid-2010s and came away with 0 titles. Sad. Houston Astros, the 2019 ALCS. I'd love to put the 2017 World Series on here for Houston, but don't lie, Jose Altuve's walk-off on Chapman in Game 6 of the 2019 ALCS put a smile on your face, regardless of what you think of the Astros titles. In 2019, the Astros went 107-55, their 3rd straight season of winning 100 or more games, 3rd straight season of clinching the AL West, and for the first time they were the number 1 seed in the American League. With extending Justin Verlander in the offseason, acquiring Zach Greinke and Aaron Sanchez at the deadline, plus sending 7 players to the All-Star game, Houston were heavy favorites to win their 2nd title in 3 seasons. In the playoffs, they slowed down a bit as they won a very close series against the Rays in the ALDS and went up against the 103-59 Yankees in the ALCS. Houston had a knack for giving the Yankees fits in their contending days, and I don't think any series exemplified that more than this one. After the Yankees shut them out 7-0 in Game 1, the Astros took the next 3 to go up 3-1, but New York won Game 5 to send the series back to Houston for Game 6. Game 6 was a bullpen game for both teams, and Houston jumped all over Chad Green early on and took a 3-0 lead on a Yuli Gurriel 3-run homer. Houston led 4-2 much of the game as the Yankees committed several mental mistakes and left runners on, but DJ LeMahieu tied the game in the top of the 9th on a 2-run homer, and the Yankees had new life. But the last mistake the Yankees made, sending Aroldis Chapman to save the game. He walked George Springer, and then Altuve crushed the walk-off 2-run homer to send Houston to the World Series. They were upset by Washington, but in terms of memorable moments in their history, this is way up there. Yeah, I like this Astros team. What are you going to do, cry? Kansas City Royals, the 2015 World Series. Yes, I wanted to put Game 6 of the 1985 World Series on here to get Cardinals fans butthurt, but I couldn't go through with it. Instead, I'll go with the title the Royals won 30 years later. After decades of ineptitude and failed rebuilds, the Royals finally got it right in the mid-2010s with building up a team that relied on fundamentals, small ball, and a dominant bullpen. As a result, Kansas City went 95-67, captured their first division title since that 85 season, and 2nd straight AL pennant. Being that it was their 2nd straight World Series appearance and lost a close series to the Giants, Kansas City came back determined to capture what was theirs. After defeating Houston in the ALDS and taking care of Toronto in the ALCS, the 90-72 Mets were awaiting them, and everyone thought the Mets' elite pitching would fare well against the steady Royals' attack. After Kansas City won a 14-inning thriller in Game 1 and blew out the Mets 7-1 in Game 2, the series went to Queens, and they had New York on the ropes. The Mets kept the series alive in a 9-3 win in Game 3, and Kansas City went up 3-1 after a 5-3 Game 4 win, but everyone remembers Game 5. New York led 2-0 going into the 9th inning. The Royals were quiet on offense all night, but the pitching was brilliant with just 2 mistakes. But Kansas City broke through and tied the game in the top of the 9th, and the game went to extras. The Royals broke through in the 12th as they jumped all over Addison Reed and exploded for 5 runs to take a 7-2 lead. The big hit being a 3-run double by Lorenzo Cain off big sexy Bartolo Colon. Wade Davis took the hill for the bottom of the 12th and clinched the series for Kansas City. Just a reminder that we should never take the Mets seriously in big moments. Los Angeles Angels, the 2002 World Series. I've been following baseball for almost 25 years, and I completely forgot the Angels won a World Series in my lifetime. How could I? This was the first World Series I vividly remember watching. Anyway, the Never Say Die Angels were a resilient bunch all season, going 99-63, and while that would be good enough for a number 1 seed in most cases, they were a wildcard team as the Moneyball A's won the West that season. But that didn't matter as the Angels took down the Dynasty Yankees in the ALDS and beat the Twins of all teams in the ALCS to advance to their first and only World Series in franchise history against another wildcard team in the Giants. Anaheim had been around since 1961, while the Giants hadn't won a World Series since 1954 when the franchise was still in New York, so it was not only a wildcard series, but it was also a series featuring 2 championship droughts of over 40 years. Kind of like a watered-down version of the 2016 World Series, if you will. So anyway, let's get down to the game that we all know in this series. San Francisco blew out Anaheim 16-4 in Game 5 to take a 3-2 series lead, and the series shifted back to Orange County. It looked to be more of the same as the Giants had a 5-0 lead after the top of the 7th inning, and Dusty Baker decided that that was enough for Russ Ortiz, who pitched 6 innings of shutout baseball. This only looks like a bad decision in hindsight, as putting in Felix Rodriguez was the right call. But on this night, he imploded and gave up a 3-run homer to make it 5-3. The bottom of the 8th, though, was the backbreaker. With no outs, 2 runners in scoring position, and now only a 5-4 lead, Baker went to the bullpen again, and Rob Nen didn't fare any better and gave up the game-tying and go-ahead RBI double to Troy Glaus, and Anaheim rallied to win by that final. The Angels won Game 7 4-1 for their first title in franchise history, and now they're just a glorified small-market team in a big-market city. Los Angeles Dodgers, the 2024 World Series. One of the most difficult choices on here, as the Dodgers are one of the most storied franchises in the league and have so many iconic moments. But had not Freddie Freeman hit the walk-off slam in Game 1 of this past fall's World Series, I'd probably give it to Kirk Gibson's walk-off in the '88 World Series. So last year, the Dodgers landed Shohei Ohtani to the surprise of nobody with a brain to that already cheat code roster, and did their usual thing of go 98-64, win the NL West, and be the number 1 seed in the National League. In the playoffs, they thwarted the San Diego Padres in the NLDS and handled the Mets in the NLCS to face the New York Yankees for the 12th time in the World Series, and for the first time in 43 years. So there's 2 reasons this series is my entry for LA, and you can probably guess which ones. Game 1, where LA trailed 3-2 in the bottom of the 9th with 2 outs, and the Yankees had just intentionally walked Mookie Betts to bring up Freeman to the plate. Freeman crushed the first pitch to right, eerily similar to Kirk Gibson's walk-off in 1988, for the first ever walk-off grand slam in World Series history. Then Game 5, where the Yankees led 5-0 in the top of the 5th, only for a series of errors and defensive mistakes to occur that allowed LA to tie the game at 5 and eventually won 7-6. Along with the previously mentioned Game 6 of the 2002 World Series, this is tied for the largest comeback in a World Series game, and the Dodgers went on to win their 2nd title in 4 years. Now I can't say they have no legit titles anymore. Miami Marlins, the 1997 World Series. Most people would say 2003 is the better one for the Marlins, considering they beat the evil Empire Yankees in the World Series and had an impressive turnaround, but most people just remember the NLCS that season, where the dumbest fan base in the MLB sent death threats to Steve Bartman. 1997, however, the Marlins were in their 5th season and had a pretty good record of 92-70. It It wasn't enough to win the NL East, but they made that a moot point, taking out the Braves in the NLCS not before sweeping the Giants in the NLDS. Just like that, the Marlins found themselves in the World Series against a great Cleveland Indians team who had made it to their second World Series in the last 3 seasons. The teams alternated wins in the series in the first 6 games, Florida winning games 1, 3, and 5, and Cleveland winning games 2, 4, and 6, and Game 7 proved to be a memorable one. Cleveland had a 2-1 lead going in the bottom of the 9th, but didn't capitalize as much as they should have in that game as they squandered several chances to put more runs on the board, including leaving the bases loaded in the top of the 9th inning. Cleveland then sent Jose Mesa out for the 9th, and the Marlins tied it to force extras. In the bottom of the 11th, Charlie Nagy loaded the bases for Edgar Renteria, who hit a hard liner up the middle off of Nagy's glove to score Craig Counsell and win the series for the Marlins. Miami became the youngest franchise to win the World Series, and Cleveland's drought lived on. It's been over 20 years, and the fact the Marlins somehow won 2 World Series still blows my mind. Minnesota Twins, the 1991 World Series. Once again, I wanted to troll Cardinals fans by putting the 1987 World Series on here when the 85-win Twins beat the 95-win Cardinals, but I'll spare them again. However, the Twins came out of nowhere in 1991 to go 95-67 and win the AL West, had a breakout season from several players, and fan favorite Kirby Puckett batted an absurd .429 in the ALCS. In the World Series against the Atlanta Braves, the home team won all the games, but the 2 that stand out the most are Games 6 and 7, where the Twins walked off the Braves in extras. With the game tied 3-3 in the bottom of the 11th, Puckett was signaled to bunt, but instead launched the walk-off homer to center to force a Game 7. And in that Game 7, it was scoreless until the bottom of the 10th inning when Gene Larkin drove the walk-off RBI single to left center field. This Game 7 is regarded as one of the greatest Game 7s of all time, as Jack Morris had a 10-inning shutout, and it's also been viewed by many baseball historians as one of the greatest pitching performances in a 7th game of the World Series. If only the Twins could do this against the Yankees in the playoffs. Milwaukee Brewers, the 2011 NLDS. The Brewers were coming off their most successful regular season in franchise history, and expectations were pretty high. In the NLDS, Milwaukee squared off against the Arizona Diamondbacks, and after the Brewers jumped out to a 2-0 lead, Arizona fought right back and forced a Game 5. The tension was at an all-time high at Miller Park as the game leaked into extra innings, with the Brewers encouraging numerous close calls. With 1 out in the bottom of the 10th, Carlos Gomez knocked a 1-out single to left, stole second, and then took off running when Nyjer Morgan smashed a single to center. Gomez slid into home safe and was greeted by players streaming onto the field as Brewers players and their fans went into a frenzy. Morgan, perhaps better known around the Milwaukee area as Tony Plush, was mobbed as well, as he was responsible for one of the biggest hits in Brewers history, as the crew would move on to the NLCS with a 3-2 win against Arizona. But because I can't have anything nice as a baseball fan, they just had to choke the LCS to the Cardinals. New York Mets, 1969. As much as we all wanted it to be the 1986 World Series, the fact is there shouldn't have been a Game 7 due to Boston's bullpen choking and Bill Buckner's game-losing error. The reason 1969 takes the cake is because this was just the Mets' 8th season in the league, and they had one of the most famous turnarounds to win the pennant. New York trailed the Cubs much of the season, and you'll never guess what happened to the Cubs in September. The Miracle Mets won 24 of their final 32 games to steal the NL East, swept the Atlanta Braves in the NLCS, and went up against the stacked Baltimore Orioles in the World Series. Baltimore was favored to win, but none of that mattered as the Mets took them out in 5 games. New York became the first expansion team to win a division title, pennant, and World Series in the same season, and they would hold that title until the Diamondbacks did it in 2001. To think the Mets were the clutch team for once. New York Yankees, the 1977 World Series. This was by far the most difficult one to pick. When you're the most decorated and successful franchise in sports, you're going to have a ton of iconic moments, and it's hard to choose just one. So I went with the 1977 World Series, where Reggie Jackson became known as Mr. October. Coming off losing the 1976 World Series, the Yankees were determined to make it back when they threw a 5-year, $2.96 million deal at Reggie Jackson in the offseason to land him from the Orioles. It was seen as controversial at the time because Jackson openly stated how much he despised George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin, but he used that as motivation to play his ass off in the Bronx. Couple that with Thurman Munson, Chris Chambliss, Bucky Dent, and a strong rotation, the Yankees overcame a slow start to the season to go 162, beat the Royals in the ALCS again, and go to the World Series once again to face the Dodgers. Fast forwarding to Game 6 with the Yankees ahead in the series 3-2 and the series back in New York, Jackson stole the hearts of just about every New Yorker that night with a 3-home run performance, becoming the first player to achieve this since Babe Ruth in 1928. The crowd chanted, "Reggie! Reggie!" as the Yankees defeated LA 8-4 for their 21st title. Jackson won World Series MVP, and his iconic game earned him the Mr. October moniker. I wish I had more failure for the Yankees that I didn't outline or will outline in this video, so here's me reminding you that Aaron Judge is a playoff choker. Philadelphia Phillies, the 1980 World Series. I guess in a perfect world, the 2008 team would be on here for the Phillies, but that team was more of a team still trying to find their potential, and they won it all. 1980, however, was more of a it's about time moment for the Phillies, as throughout the 70s, the Phillies had some great teams, but they could never get over the hump in the NLCS. It's also worthy of noting that Philly beat a dominant Royals team in the World Series, who were also underachievers throughout the 70s too, and this built a series between two franchises looking for their first title. Led by NL MVP Mike Schmidt, the Phillies defeated the 97-65 Royals, led by AL MVP George Brett, in 6 games, more notably in Game 5, where in the top of the 9th, Kansas City led 3-2, and Philly rallied to win thanks to a Manny Trillo frozen rope for the go-ahead run. The Phillies thwarted a Royals rally in the bottom half to win 4-3, and then won Game 6 in Philadelphia to win the franchise's first World Series and the city's first World Series since the A's did it in 1930. Philadelphia beating Kansas City for a championship, eh? I guess not much has changed in the last 45 years. Pittsburgh Pirates, the 1960 World Series. Yes, fellow Bucks fans, way back when JFK was elected president, the Pirates were a proud franchise. The ownership and front office put winning before the bottom line, the manager had baseball IQ, and their farm was the envy of most of the league. The 1979 World Series and 2013 NL wildcard game were also in consideration, but it's pretty hard to top a walk-off homer in Game 7 at home. With Dick Stewart, Smokey Burgess, Don Hoke, a pretty good rotation led by Bob Friend, and Hall of Famers Dick Groat and the great one Roberto Clemente, and manager not Derek Shelton, just kidding, Danny Murtaugh, the Bucks ran away with the NL that season, but their opponent in the Yankees were heavy favorites. The 1960 World Series was one of the strangest phenomenons of all time, as the underdog Pirates beat New York in 7 games, but the Yankees outscored Pittsburgh 55-27 in the series. The minus 28 run differential is the lowest ever by a World Series participant, winner or loser, but hey, it's whoever wins 4 games first, and the Bucks won 4 close games. Let's cut to the chase. It's Game 7 at Forbes Field, and both teams had gone back and forth all game. In the top of the 9th, the Yankees tied the game 9-9, and Ralph Terry took the mound in the bottom frame. The first batter he faced was Bill Mazeroski, and on the second pitch of the at-bat, Maz smashed the legendary walk-off shot over the left field wall to win the game 10-9, and the series for the Buccos for their first title in 35 years. Bobby Richardson of the Yankees won World Series MVP, but no one cares about that because the Bucks won the series and Bill Maz was the real MVP. Bob Nutting is seething over this championship for the Bucks. Why can't they do this shit with Paul Skeens? San Diego Padres, the 2022 NLDS. You have an argument for the 1984 NLCS as well, but beating your arch rivals in the playoffs who won 111 games, yeah, that'll easily put you on here. In their first playoff appearance in a full 162-game season since 2006, the Padres were a solid team that relied on power in the bats, a strong rotation, and their prospects from the previous draft were developing quite nicely. They had a good 89-73 record and took 2 of 3 from the Mets in the NL Wildcard Series, but when they faced the juggernaut Dodgers in the NLDS, many wrote off the Padres. After the Dodgers won Game 1, everyone thought the Dodgers were on their way to at least the NLCS. But San Diego responded by winning 3 straight to take the series in 4 games, and in Game 4, the Dodgers jumped out to an early lead and scored 1 more in the top of the 7th to go up 3-0. However, the Padres rallied with 5 unanswered runs in the bottom of the inning to complete one of the biggest upsets in MLB history. With the win, the Padres became the first team since the 1906 White Sox to win a playoff series against a team that was 22 or more games better than them. In 2023, MLB.com ranked the Padres' upset of the Giants as the second biggest upset in postseason history, behind only the aforementioned upset by the White Sox in the 1906 World Series. San Francisco Giants, the shot heard round the world. The Giants were another challenging one to choose, seeing that they have a lot of iconic moments as well. I think either way though, Dodger fans would get the short end of the stick for this entry, as 1962 is my next choice for the Giants, but Bobby Thompson's 3-run shot against them way back in 1951 to win the pennant when both rivals were based in New York takes my cake on this list. The Giants won an insane 37 of their final 44 games to catch the first-place Dodgers and force a playoff series to decide the NL champion. So in the rubber match, Brooklyn had a 4-1 lead going in the bottom of the 9th at the Polo Grounds. New York cut it to 4-2, and Thompson took the plate with 2 men on. Ralph Branca didn't want to face the risk of Willie Mays and battled on with Thompson. On a 1-1 count, Thompson drilled it to the left field line to walk off the Dodgers, and the Giants were on their way to the World Series. The Yankees won the series in 6 games, but the shot heard round the world is often regarded as one of the most iconic home runs in MLB history, and is arguably the most iconic moment in the legendary rivalry between the Giants and Dodgers. But hey, 70 years later, the Giants pissed away a 107-win season by choking to the Dodgers in the NLDS. Seattle Mariners, the double. Seattle is the only franchise to have never played in a World Series, but it's not for lack of talent. Case in point, they had some very good teams in the 90s, but they were kind of like the MLB version of the Tennessee Titans. You never bought them in the playoffs, and a choke job was inevitable. However, in 1995, the Mariners pulled an Uno reverse card on the Yankees in the ALDS. Man, the Yankees sure do appear in a lot of these. That's not a mistake. Anyway, at 79-66 and winning their first division title in franchise history, the stacked lineup in Edgar Martinez, Tino Martinez, Jay Buhner, Ken Griffey Jr., and Randy Johnson. Many people figured Seattle would put up a fight against the Yankees, but New York would win the series. True to form, the Yankees won the first 2 games of the series in New York, but Seattle won the next 2 to set up a Game 5. The Yankees took a 4-2 lead after the 6th inning, but Seattle tied it in the bottom of the 8th, and the game went to extras. In the 11th, New York took a 5-4 lead, and Jack McDowell took the mound for the Yankees. After a bunt single and Griffey single to put runners at the corners, Martinez ripped a double to the left field fence to score both runners and sent Seattle to the ALCS. Cleveland won the series in 6 games, but this is considered by many Mariners fans the high point of their fandom, no offense. We all know what it could be for Seattle, though, if the Yankees didn't get revenge 6 years later. St. Louis Cardinals, the 2011 World Series. Despite my hatred for the Cardinals and anguish for the Rangers for this series, I'm not stupid enough to pretend like this series wasn't iconic. The Rangers were a machine in 2011 with an offense that finished 5th in runs scored and 2nd in batting average, and had added Cliff Lee to that balanced rotation. The Cardinals were good but not dominant, going 90-72, and clinched a wild card, losing the Central to the Brewers, but it's the Cardinals we're talking about, so logic goes out the window here. They beat the Phillies in the NLDS, who were missing Ryan Howard from a torn Achilles tendon, by the way, and then beat the choking Brewers in the ALCS to make the World Series. Too bad no other team gets to face a handicap team in the playoffs. Anyway, in the World Series, Texas won 3 of the first 5, and in Game 6, Texas looked to be on their way to winning their first championship with a 7-5 lead in the bottom of the 9th with 2 outs and 2 strikes on David Freese. Follow that with incompetence on Ron Washington's part by not putting Endy Chavez in right field to allow Freese to deliver the game-tying triple. The Rangers appeared to have made it a moot point as they retook a 9-7 lead on a 2-run blast by Josh Hamilton, but never underestimate the deal with the devil the Cardinals made. Again, with 2 outs and down to their last strike, Lance Berkman singled to center to tie it again, and then Freese walked off the Rangers on a solo shot. St. Louis won Game 7, and 14 years later, this series still pisses me off. I'm not even a Rangers fan, I just hate the Cardinals that much. Anyway, I'm moving on before I throw shit. Tampa Bay Rays, the 2011 final day of the regular season. When you start the season 0-6, everyone writes you off. When you're down 9 games in the wildcard race in September, you as a fan are most likely preparing for the offseason and the next season. But the small market Rays battled back all season, included defeating the Red Sox in 6 out of 7 games the teams played against each other in September, pulling into a tie for the wild card on September 26th, with only 2 games remaining in the regular season. On September 28th, the Rays won the final game against the Yankees in spectacular fashion. Trailing 5-0 after just 2 innings and 7-0 after the 8th inning, the Rays loaded the bases with no outs. Tampa cut it to 7-3, but then Evan Longoria's 3-run homer made it 7-6 and tied it in the bottom of the 9th to force extras. Longoria then walked off the Yankees in the bottom of the 12th on a solo shot to left, and at almost the exact same moment, the Orioles had rallied to beat the Red Sox. New York had already clinched the AL East, so Boston's destiny was in their hands, and Boston's loss with Tampa's win eliminated the Red Sox from the playoffs. I think Yankee fans can agree that this was the one game they didn't mind losing. As for the Rays, the only thing that would make this better is if this comeback didn't happen in Tropicana Field. Texas Rangers, the 2023 playoffs. Why do I always have to mention 2011 with the Rangers? Because it's kind of like the World Series version of 28-3 to me, that's why. But 12 years later, Texas shed their choker label by winning the 2023 World Series. They finished their rebuild quicker than expected, going 90-72 and being a wild card in the AL, narrowly missing out on the AL West title. In the playoffs, the Rangers swept the Rays and Orioles in the wild card series and ALDS respectively to meet up with their arch rival and in-state rival Houston Astros for the AL pennant. Similar to the 2019 World Series, the road team won all the games, as the Rangers won the first 2 in Houston, but the Astros rebounded to win the next 3 in Arlington. It seemed like the Astros were on their way back to the World Series and the pain for Texas would live on. But the Rangers blew out the Astros 9-2 and 11-4 in Games 6 and 7 in Houston to win their first pennant since that 2011 season. They faced another wild-card team that finished a rebuild quickly in the Diamondbacks, who won just 84 games. Sorry, Arizona, you're not St. Louis, so you're not allowed to win a World Series winning 84 or fewer games. Out of the games, Game 1 is the most iconic to me, where it was back and forth all game, and then Corey Seager hit a mountain 2-run shot to tie it in the bottom of the 9th. In extras, Adolis Garcia walked off the Snakes on a solo shot to right. Arizona blew out Texas 9-1 in Game 2, but the Rangers won the next 3 games in Phoenix to clinch the franchise's first World Series title. It should be their second, though. Toronto Blue Jays, the 1993 World Series. Another easy one here, as the defending champion Blue Jays were basically just as good as the 92 team in 1993. Toronto went 95-67 and won the AL East again. After winning a close ALCS over the White Sox, they met up with the Philadelphia Phillies for the Fall Classic. Philly was 97-65, but many still lean towards Toronto to go back-to-back, and two games in particular stand out in this series. Game 4, where the Blue Jays won an absolute thriller 15-14, where they trailed 12-7 after the 5th inning and 14-9 after the 7th inning. A 6-run top of the 8th won the game for Toronto, and the classy brotherly folks in Philadelphia sent Mitch Williams death threats for Game 4. But of course the big one came in Game 6 when a 5-run top of the 7th in the Skydome gave the Phillies a 6-5 lead. In the bottom of the 9th, when Ricky Henderson walked and Paul Molitor singled to bring up Joe Carter, and a 2-2 count on him, he hit a 3-run home run to win the game and World Series, and Blue Jays radio play-by-play announcer Tom Cheek gave one of the most memorable calls in MLB history.
Here's the pitch on the way, a swing and a belt, left field, way back, Blue Jays win it! The Blue Jays are World Series champions! As Joe Carter hits a 3-run home run in the 9th inning, and the Blue Jays have repeated as World Series champions. Touch 'em all, Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run in your life.
The Blue Jays became the second expansion team to win 2 World Series titles, the other being the 1969 and 86 Mets, but haven't made it back to the big dance since, mainly because of shit like this. And finally, the Washington Nationals, the 2019 playoffs. 25 years prior, the Montreal Expos were robbed of potentially winning the World Series due to the lockout. 7 years prior, the Nationals choked the NLDS against the Cardinals, surprise, surprise, and kept on choking anytime they made the playoffs. To start 2019, the Nationals were 19-31 through 50 games, and everyone rightfully wrote them off. But Washington mounted an incredible run in their first year without Bryce Harper, going 74-38 the rest of the season. They rode that to the first wildcard spot in the NL, where in the wildcard they made Trent Grisham, the Brewers version of Bill Buckner, had a stunning victory over the back-to-back NL champion Dodgers in the NLDS, and swept the Cardinals in the NLCS, where Cardinal fans wrote off the Nationals going into the series like they did the Red Sox in 2004. This was their first World Series appearance in franchise history, and going up against the Astros, who won 107 games, the magical ride looked over. But as I mentioned earlier, the road team won all the games, as Washington won the first 2 games in Houston but dropped the next 3 in DC. But when the series shifted back to Houston, the Nationals forced a Game 7 with a 7-2 win in Game 6, and in Game 7, Washington found themselves down 2-0 in the top of the 7th, and the bats were quiet until Anthony Rendon hit a solo homer to cut the lead in half. After Zach Greinke walked Juan Soto, Will Harris came in to relieve, and then the NLDS hero Howie Kendrick earned that moniker again with a 2-run shot off the right field pole to give Washington a lead that they would not relinquish. The Nats would get 3 more runs to win 6-2, and that won the franchise's first championship and DC's first World Series in 95 years. Steven Strasburg was the series MVP, and it was ranked the 3rd biggest upset in World Series history. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly did. Do you have any other iconic wins for an MLB team?